Drawing Spider-Man in my style, part 3, doing the drawing. All right, now we're going to start the actual drawing of Spider-Man in my style. One of the things I do is I just take the sketch work and then I'll lower the opacity down to about 40%. That way I can use the sketch as my reference. And then when I start the drawing phase here, the key things I always do with, especially like if I'm drawing something like Spider-Man, I'll focus more on the eye area. So when I'm drawing the mask, I'll place the eyes pretty much at an appropriate height, roughly between where the top of the ears and the bottom of the nose would be. So we talked about that be the nose and then kind of like where the top of the ears would be. And then the shape, uh, it really determines the expression on his face. Since he's wearing a mask, the eye shape is really going to tell everything that you want as far as expression. So the expression of the eyes can vary depending on the comic art style you're trying to go for. The small classic eyes or the large expressive ones. So this is kind of a medium. I do like the bigger eyes on Spider-Man. That's always something that I've always liked. It gives him a little bit more expression in my personal opinion. And so here I kind of kept in mind where the lighting is going to be. So for this drawing, the lighting is pretty much going to come from the backside. So I'm keeping in mind where the lighting is on the mask. And so the focus is going to be on the eyes. And it really does set the tone for the rest of the drawing. The next thing I always do is I'll do block shading. Because again, I kind of keep where the light's going to be at. And then I'll place all my block shading to kind of fill it all out. And again, when I say block shading, I typically would just basically rough out a shape based on where the light is, and then basically just fill it all in. And I'll look at accordingly how I go with lighting. Here again, you just got to have a basic understanding of lighting and shading. But I will tell you too, sometimes I feel like style can trump that if you're going for something else. So don't get too pigeonholed thinking that you have to light it a certain way or shading if it takes away from the aesthetic style that you're going for. The next thing I'll typically work on now is kind of some of the finer details like the line work. So you can see the lines, adding the emblem down here and then the lines. And again, remember with the lines, you want to keep the curvature of the lines because it keeps it from looking flat and it gives it some depth. Another thing too is varying the line thickness. You want to use your thicker lines for the main outline of the head and the body and the eyes, while keeping the inner web lines kind of thinner to add depth. So you can see the outer lines that I'm using, they're pretty thick, especially with the eyes area. And then like the chin, you can see how thick these lines are. But when it comes to the actual webbing, they're pretty thin, and it kind of helps with the overall contrast and giving a lot more depth. The last thing I typically do is I'll add final details on my drawing. And what that is like pretty much like little detail marks that I'll put a little bit on the block shading just to kind of give it some kind of contrast, and then I'll finish up with the spider sense. Here you can just make any kind of design however you want. I've seen it a lot where it's just kind of like lines. I've seen where it's big fractures, but me personally, I always kind of like the lightning bolt looking things, and there's no rhyme or reason to them. I just kind of make shapes to them, and then I'll try to add a little extra to them. So that's kind of how I approach it with the drawing. And again, lastly, don't forget, use references. Don't be afraid to use references, especially some of the artists that are very well known for drawing Spider-Man. So like Ditko, Ramirez Sr., even McFarlane has one of the greatest Spider-Mans in my personal opinion. So you kind of use that to kind of get a feel of how they approach drawing Spider-Man to kind of get a dynamic look to him, and then take it from there.